Chapter 3, Part 1 of Agriculture for Beginners. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. Agriculture for Beginners by Charles William Burkett. Chapter 3, Part 1, The Plant. Section 12. How a Plant Feeds from the Air. If you partly burn a match, you will see that it becomes black. This black substance into which the match changes is called carbon. Examine a fresh stick of charcoal, which is, as you no doubt know, burnt wood. You see in the charcoal every fiber that you saw in the wood itself. This means that every part of the plant contains carbon. How important, then, is this substance to the plant? You will be surprised to know that the total amount of carbon in plants comes from the air. All the carbon that a plant gets is taken in by the leaves of the plant. Not a particle is gathered by the roots. A large tree, weighing perhaps 11,000 pounds, requires in its growth carbon from 16 million cubic yards of air. Perhaps after these statements you will think there is danger that the carbon of the air may sometime become exhausted. The air of the whole world contains about 1,760,000,000,000 pounds of carbon. Moreover, this is continually being added to by our fires and by the breath of animals. When wood or coal is used for fuel, the carbon of the burning substance is returned to the air in the form of gas. Some large factories burn great quantities of coal and thus turn much carbon back to the air. A single factory in Germany is estimated to give back to the air daily about 5,280,000 pounds of carbon. You see, then, that carbon is constantly being put back into the air to replace that which is used by growing plants. The carbon of the air can be used by none but green plants, and by them only in the sunlight. We may compare the green coloring matter of the leaf to a machine, and the sunlight to the power or energy which keeps the machine in motion. By means, then, of sunlight and the green coloring matter of the leaves, the plant secures carbon. The carbon passes into the plant and is there made into two foods very necessary to the plant, namely starch and sugar. Sometimes the plant uses the starch and sugar immediately. At other times it stores both away, as it does in the Irish and sweet potato and in beets, cabbage, peas, and beans. These plants are used as food by man because they contain so much nourishment, that is, starch and sugar, which were stored away by the plant for its own future use. Exercise. Examine some charcoal. Can you see the rings of growth? Slightly char paper, cloth, meat, sugar, starch, etc. What does the turning black prove? What per cent of these substances do you think is pure carbon? Section 13. The sap current. The root hairs take nourishment from the soil. The leaves manufacture starch and sugar. These manufactured foods must be carried to all parts of the plant. There are two currents to carry them. One passes from the roots through the young wood to the leaves, and one, a downward current, passes through the bark, carrying needed food to the roots. If you should injure the roots, the water supply to the leaves will be cut off, and the leaves would immediately wither. On the other hand, if you remove the bark, that is, girdle the tree, you in no way interfere with the water supply, and the leaves do not wither. Girdling does, however, interfere with the downward food current through the bark. If the tree be girdled, the roots sooner or later suffer from lack of food supply from the leaves. Owing to this food stoppage, the roots will cease to grow and will soon be unable to take in sufficient water, and then the leaves will begin to droop. This, however, may not happen until several months after the girdling. Sometimes a partly girdled branch grows much in thickness just above the girdle, as is shown in Fig. 29. This extra growth seems to be due to a stoppage of the rich supply of food which was on its way to the roots through the bark. It could go no farther and was therefore used by the tree to make unnatural growth at this point. You will now understand how and why trees die when they are girdled to clear new ground. It is, then, the general law of sap movement that the upward current from the roots passes through the woody portion of the trunk, and that the current bearing the food made by the leaves passes down through the bark. Exercise. Let the teacher see that these and all other experiments are performed by the pupils. Do not allow them to guess, but make them see. Girdle valueless trees or saplings of several kinds, cutting the bark away in a complete circle around the tree. Do not cut into the wood. How long before the tree shows signs of injury? Girdle a single small limb on a tree. What happens? Explain. Section 14. The flower and the seed. Some people think that the flowers by the wayside are for the purpose of beautifying the world and increasing man's enjoyment. Do you think this is true? Undoubtedly a flower is beautiful, and to be beautiful is one of the uses of many flowers, but it is not the chief use of a flower. You know that when peach or apple blossoms are nipped by the spring frost, the fruit crop is in danger. The fruit of the plant bears the seed, and the flower produces the fruit. That is its chief duty. Do you know any plant that produces seed without flowers? Someone answers, the corn, the elm, the maple all produce seed, but have no flower. No, that is not correct. If you look closely, you will find in the spring very small flowers on the elm and on the maple, while the ear and tassel are really the blossoms of the corn plant. Every plant that produces seed has flowers, although they may sometimes seem very curious flowers. Let us see what a flower really is. Take, for example, a buttercup, cotton, tobacco, or plum blossom. You will find on the outside a row of green leaves enclosing the flower when it is still a bud. These leaves are the sepals. Next, on the inside is a row of colored leaves, or petals. Arranged inside of the petals are some thread-like parts, each with a knob on the end. These are the stamens. Examine one stamen closely. On the knob at its tip you should find, if the flower is fully open, some fine grains or powder. In the lily this powder is so abundant that in smelling the flower you often brush a quantity of it off on your nose. This substance is called pollen, and the knob on the end of the stamen, on which the pollen is borne, is called the anther. The pollen is of very great importance to the flower. Without it there could be no seeds. The stamens, as pollen bearers, then, are very important. But there is another part to each flower that is of equal value. This part you will find in the center of the flower, inside the circle of stamens. It is called the pistil. The swollen tip of the pistil is the stigma. The swollen base of the pistil forms the ovary. If you carefully cut open this ovary, you will find in it very small immature seeds. Some plants bear all these parts in the same flower, that is, each blossom has stamens, pistil, petals, and sepals. The pear blossom and the tomato blossom represent such flowers. Other plants bear their stamens and pistils in separate blossoms. Stamens and pistils may even occur in separate plants, and some blossoms have no sepals or petals at all. Look at the corn plant. Here the tassel is a cluster of many flowers, each of which bears only stamens. The ear is likewise a cluster of many flowers, each of which bears only a pistil. The dust that you see falling from the tassel is the pollen, and the long silky threads of the ear are the stigmas. Now no plant can bear seeds unless the pollen of the stamen falls on the stigma. Corn cannot therefore form seed unless the dust of the tassel falls upon the silk. Did you ever notice how poorly the cob is filled on a single cornstalk standing alone in a field? Do you see why? It is because when a plant stands alone the wind blows the pollen away from the tassel, and little or none is received on the stigmas below. In the corn plant the stamens and pistils are separate, that is, they do not occur on the same flower, although they are on the same plant. This is also true of the cucumber. In many plants, however, such as the hemp, hop, sassafras, willow, and others, the staminate parts are on one plant and the pistillate parts are on another. This is also true in several other cultivated plants. For example, in some strawberries the stamens are absent or useless, that is, they bear no good pollen. In such cases, the grower must see to it that near by are strawberry plants that bear stamens, in order that those plants which do not bear pollen may become pollinated, that is to say, may have pollen carried to them. After the stigma has been supplied with pollen, a single pollen grain sends a thread-like sprout down through the stigma into the ovary. This process, if successfully completed, is called fertilization. Exercise. Examine several flowers and identify the parts named in the last section. Try in the proper season to find the pollen on the maple, willow, alder, and pine, and on wheat, cotton, and the morning glory. How fast does the ovary of the apple blossom enlarge? Measure one and watch it closely from day to day. Can you find any plants that have their stamens and ovaries on separate individuals? Section 15. Pollination. Nature has several interesting ways of bringing about pollination. In the corn, willow, and pine, the pollen is picked up by the wind and carried away. Much of it is lost, but some reaches the stigmas or receptive parts of other corn, willow, or pine flowers. This is a very wasteful method, and all plants using it must provide much pollen. Many plants employ a much better method. They have learned how to make insects bear their pollen. In plants of this type, the parts of the blossom are so shaped and so placed as to deposit pollen from the stamen on the insect and to receive pollen from the insect into the stigmas. When you see the clumsy bumblebee clambering over and pushing his way into a clover blossom, you may be sure that he is getting well dusted with pollen, and that the next blossom which he visits will secure a full share on its stigmas. When flowers fit themselves to be pollinated by insects, they can no longer use the wind and are helpless if insects do not visit them. They therefore cunningly plan two ways to invite the visits of insects. First, they provide a sweet nectar as a repast for the insect visitor. The nectar is a sugary solution found in the bottom of the flower and is used by the visitor as food or to make honey. Second, flowers advertise to let each insect know that they have something for it. The advertising is done either by showy colors or by perfume. Insects have wonderful powers of smell. When you see showy flowers or smell fragrant ones, you will know that such flowers are advertising the presence either of nectar or of pollen to make bee bread, and that such flowers depend on insects for pollination. A season of heavy, cold rains during the blossoming time may often injure the fruit crop by preventing insects from carrying pollen from flower to flower. You now also understand why plants often fail to produce seeds indoors. Since they are shut in, they cannot receive proper insect visits. Plants such as tomatoes or other garden fruits dependent upon insect pollination must, if raised in the greenhouse where insects cannot visit them, be pollinated by hand. Exercise. Exclude insect visitors from some flower or flower cluster, for example, clover, by covering with a paper bag, and see whether the flower can produce seeds that are capable of growing. Compare as to number and vitality the seeds of such a flower with those of an uncovered flower. Observe insects closely. Do you ever find pollen on them? What kinds of insects visit the clover, the cowpea, the sourwood, the flax? Is wheat pollinated by insects or by the wind or by some other means? Do bees fly in rainy weather? How will a long rainy season at blossoming time affect the apple crop? Why? Should bees be kept in an orchard? Why? Section 16. Crosses, hybrids, and cross-pollination. In our study of flowers and their pollination, we have seen that the seed is usually the descendant of two parents, or at least of two organs, one the ovary producing the seed, the other the pollen, which is necessary to fertilize the ovary. It happens that sometimes the pollen of one blossom fertilizes the ovary of its own flower, but more often the pollen from one plant fertilizes the ovary of another plant. This latter method is called cross-pollination. As a rule, cross-pollination makes seed that will produce a better plant than simple pollination would. Cross-pollination by hand is often used by plant breeders when, for purposes of seed selection, a specially strong plant is desired. The steps in hand pollination are as follows. 1. Remove the anthers before they open, to prevent them from pollinating the stigma. 2. Cover the flower thus treated with a paper bag to prevent stray pollen from getting on it. 3. When the ovary is sufficiently developed, carry pollen to the stigma by hand from the anthers of another plant, which you will have selected to furnish it, and rebag it to keep out any stray pollen which might accidentally get in. 4. Collect the seeds when they are mature and label them properly. Hand pollination has this advantage. You know both parents of your seed. If pollination occur naturally, you know the maternal but have no means of judging the paternal plant. You can readily see, therefore, how hand pollination enables you to secure seed derived from two well-behaved parents. Sometimes we can breed one kind of plant on another. The result of such crossbreeding is known as a hybrid. In the animal kingdom, the mule is a common example of this crossbreeding. Plant hybrids were formerly called mules also, but this suggestive term is almost out of use. It is only when plants of two distinct kinds are crossed that the result is called a hybrid. For example, a blackjack oak on a white oak, an apple on a pear. If the parent plants are closely related, for example, two kinds of apples, the resulting plant is simply known as a cross. Hybrids and crosses are valuable in that they usually differ from both parents and yet combine some qualities of each. They often leave off some of the qualities of the parent plant, and at other times have such qualities more markedly than did their parents. Thus they often produce an interesting new kind of plant. Sometimes we are able by hybridization to combine in one plant the good qualities of two plants, and thus make a great advance in agriculture. The new forms brought about by hybridization may be fixed or made permanent by such selection as is mentioned in section 18. Hybridization is of great aid in originating new plants. It often happens that a plant will be more fruitful when pollinated by one variety than by some other variety. This is well illustrated in Fig. 41. A fruit grower or farmer should know much about these subjects before selecting varieties for his orchard, vineyard, etc. Exercise. With the help of your teacher, try to cross some plants. Such an experiment will take time, but will be most interesting. You must remember that many crosses must be attempted in order to gain success with even a few. Section 17. Propagation by buds. It is the business of the farmer to make plants grow, or, as it is generally called, to propagate plants. This he does in one of two ways: by buds, that is, by small pieces cut from parent plants, or by seeds. The chief aim in both methods should be to secure, in the most convenient manner, the best paying plants. Many plants are most easily and quickly propagated by buds. For example, the grape, red raspberry, fig, and many others that we cultivate for the flower only, such as the carnation, geranium, rose, and begonia. In growing plants from cuttings, a piece is taken from the kind of plant that one wishes to grow. The greatest care must be exercised in order to get a healthy cutting. If we take a cutting from a poor plant, what can we expect but to grow a poor plant like the one from which our cutting was taken? On the other hand, if a fine, strong, vigorous, fruitful plant be selected, we shall expect to grow just such a fine, healthy, fruitful plant. We expect the cutting to make exactly the same variety of plant as the parent stock. We must therefore decide on the variety of berry, grape, fig, carnation, or rose that we wish to propagate, and then look for the strongest and most promising plants of this variety within our reach. The utmost care will not produce a fine plant, if we start from poor stock. What qualities are most desirable in a plant from which cuttings are to be taken? First, it should be productive, hardy, and suited to your climate and your needs. Second, it should be healthy. Do not take cuttings from a diseased plant, since the cutting may carry the disease. Cuttings may be taken from various parts of the plant, sometimes even from parts of the leaf, as in the begonia. More often, however, they are drawn from parts of the stem. As to the age of the twig from which the cutting is to be taken, Professor Bailey says, "For most plants the proper age or maturity of wood for the making of cuttings may be determined by giving the twig a quick bend. If it snaps and hangs by the bark, it is in the proper condition. If it bends without breaking, it is too young and soft or too old. If it splinters, it is too old and woody." Some plants, as the geranium, succeed best if the cuttings from which they are grown are taken from soft, young parts of the plant. Others, for example, the grape or rose, do better when the cutting is made from more mature wood. Cuttings vary in size and may include one or more buds. After a hardy, vigorous cutting is made, insert it about 1/2 or 1/3 of its length in soil. A soil free from organic matter is much the best, since in such soil the cuttings are much less liable to disease. A fine clean sand is commonly used by professional gardeners. When cuttings have rooted well, this may require a month or more, they may be transplanted to larger pots. Sometimes, instead of cutting off a piece and rooting it, portions of branches are made to root before they are separated from the parent plant. This method is often followed, and is known as layering. It is a simple process. Just bend the tip of a bough down and bury it in the earth. The black raspberry forms layers naturally, but gardeners often aid it by burying the overhanging tips in the earth so that more tips may easily take root. Strawberries develop runners that root themselves in a similar fashion. Grafts and buds are really cuttings which, instead of being buried in sand to produce roots of their own, are set on the roots of other plants. Grafting and budding are practiced when these methods are more convenient than cutting, or when the gardener thinks there is danger of failure to get plants to take root as cuttings. Neither grafting nor budding is, however, necessary for the raspberry or the grape, for these propagate most readily from cuttings. It is often the case that a budded or grafted plant is more fruitful than a plant on its own roots. In cases of this kind, of course, grafts or buds are used. The white or Irish potato is usually propagated from pieces of the potato itself. Each piece used for planting bears one eye or more. The potato itself is really an underground stem and the eyes are buds. This method of propagation is therefore really a peculiar kind of cutting. Since the eye is a bud and our potato plant for the next year is to develop from the bud, it is of much importance, as we have seen, to know exactly what kind of plant our potato comes from. If the potato is taken from a small plant that had but a few poor potatoes in the hill, we may expect the bud to produce a similar plant and a correspondingly poor crop. We must see to it then that our seed potatoes are drawn from vines that were good producers, because new potato plants are like the plants from which they were grown. Of course, when our potatoes are in the bin, we cannot tell from what kind of plants they came. We must therefore select our seed potatoes in the field. Seed potatoes should always be selected from those hills that produce most bountifully. Be assured that the increased yield will richly repay this care in selecting. It matters not so much whether the seed potato be large or small. It must, however, come from a hill bearing a large yield of fine potatoes. Sweet potato plants are produced from shoots, or growing buds, taken from the potato itself, so that in their case, too, the piece that we use in propagating is a part of the original plant, and will therefore be like it under similar conditions. Just as with the Irish potato, it is important to know how good a yielder you are planting. You should watch during harvest and select for propagation for the next year only such plants as yield best. We should exercise fully as much care in selecting proper individuals from which to make a cutting or a layer as we do in selecting a proper animal to breed from. Just as we select the finest Jersey in the herd for breeding purposes, so we should choose first the variety of plant we desire and then the finest individual plant of that variety. If the variety of the potato that we desire to raise be early rose, it is not enough to select any early rose plants, but the very best early rose plants to furnish our seeds. It is not enough to select large, fine potatoes for cuttings. A large potato may not produce a bountifully yielding plant. It will produce a plant like one that produced it. It may be that this one large potato was the only one produced by the original plant. If so, the plant that grows from it will tend to be similarly unproductive. Thus you see the importance of selecting in the field a plant that has exactly the qualities desired in the new plant. One of the main reasons why gardeners raise plants from buds instead of from seeds is that the seed of many plants will not produce plants like the parent. This failure to come true, as it is called, is sometimes of value, for it occasionally leads to improvement. For example, suppose that 1,000 apples or other fruit or flower seeds from plants usually propagated by cuttings be planted. It may be that out of 1,000 or 1,000,000 will be a very valuable plant. If a valuable plant be so produced, it should be most carefully guarded, multiplied by cuttings or grafts, and introduced far and wide. It is in this way that new varieties of fruits and flowers are produced from time to time. Sometimes, too, a single bud on a tree will differ from the other buds and will produce a branch different from the other branches. This is known as bud variation. When there is thus developed a branch which happens to be of a superior kind, it should be propagated by cuttings just as you would propagate it if it had originated from a seed. Mr. Gideon of Minnesota planted many apple seeds, and from them all raised one tree that was very fruitful, finely flavored, and able to withstand the cold Minnesota winter. This tree he multiplied by grafts, and named it the wealthy apple. It is said that in giving this one apple to the world he benefited mankind to the value of more than $1,000,000. It would be well to watch for any valuable bud or seed variants, and never let a promising one be lost. Plants grown in this way from seeds are usually spoken of as seedlings. Plants to be propagated from buds. The following list gives the names and methods by which our common garden fruits and flowers are propagated. Figs. Use cuttings 8 to 10 inches long, or layer. Grapes. Use long cuttings, layer, or graft upon old vines. Apples. Graft upon seedlings, usually crab seedlings 1 year old. Pears. Bud upon pear seedlings. Cherries. Bud upon cherry stalk. Plums. Bud upon peach stalk. Peaches. Bud upon peach or plum seedlings. Quinces. Use cuttings or layer. Blackberries. Propagate by suckers cut from parent stem. Black raspberries. Layer, remove old stem. Red raspberries. Propagate by root cuttings or suckers. Strawberries. Propagate by runners. Currants and gooseberries. Use long cuttings. These plants grow well only in cool climates. If attempted in warm climates, set in cold exposure. Carnations, geraniums, roses, begonias, etc. Propagate by cuttings rooted in sand and then transplant to small pots. Exercise. Propagate fruits, grape, fig, strawberry, of various kinds, also ornamental plants. How long does it take them to root? Geraniums rooted in the spring will bloom in the fall. Do you know any one who selects seed potatoes properly? Make a careful selection of seed at the next harvest time. End of chapter 3, part 1.